You cannot know who you truly are unless you pursue self-knowledge in relationship to who God is, because you are made in God's image. Consequently, your view of who God is will either bring you to true self-knowledge, or if your view is flawed, will cause you to construct a false self-image, an avatar of your true self, a self-made image pieced together of unrestrained desires, beastly impulses, and false worldviews. Yes, there is a large correlation between who you become as a person and who you conceive God to be. Atheists construct their who from untamed imaginations because they have no source from which to draw knowledge of humanity except the limited schools of ever-changing science and philosophy. But this problem also pervades the worship halls of Christendom. Unfortunately, there is an increasing loss of a high view of God among modern Christians. This trend began dozens of years ago, when the trend continues to negatively affect Christian lives and their worship. Today, the God that many imagine is little more than a cosmic Santa Claus who exists to give them gifts they are free to use for their own selfish desires. For others, God is an invisible, loving buddy who makes few demands of them and always makes allowances for their favorite sins. Their God withholds painful discipline because modern philosophy holds that love and strict discipline are not compatible. Consequently, they believe that a loving God would not punish them, nor would he evoke shame and guilt when they make immoral choices. For still other Christians, they imagine God desperately needs our attention and our love, and they believe that in his need for our love, God is willing to set aside his nature of justice and withhold any wrath we might be legally due. They want a cuddly God who is anxious to make them happy, even if it means allowing them to live in conflict with his natural laws. Under their God, everyone is free to determine their own truth because they believe there is no source of absolute truth. Because we are made in the image of God, it is important to have an accurate view of God and his attributes if we are to become all that we can be. If we dismiss God's demanding attributes and righteous expectations and model ourselves only after his gentler attributes, we will distort our worldview, our view of ourselves and others, and then unavoidably find our lives out of harmony with the unyielding laws of the universe and principles of human existence. God made everything there is and left blueprints in scripture and nature. Without this high view of God, even the choice of who we are, as defined by personal pronouns, becomes a jumble of confusion. No wonder today many young people are desperately crying out, "Who am I? Why am I here? Do I matter? Why am I not happy? What is this emptiness that is sucking me in like a black hole?" Churches reduce the majesty of God in an attempt to make people comfortable, to fill the pews and the coffers. Instead of lifting up the risen Christ, Christian leaders lift up a God created in their minds, a kinder, gentler God that serves us, instead of a just God that we are obligated to serve and obey. Obedience, discipline, punishment, consequences, guilt, and shame are all unwelcome ideas today in the Christian vernacular. One proponent of this view was heard to say, "We don't talk so much about sin in our church because it just brings people down. We only bring positive, uplifting messages." More and more today, we present God's laws as only guidelines or strong suggestions, optional rules for living, with the bite of consequences removed. Theologian W. Tozer noticed the downward spiral of the church from a high view of God and wrote strongly about it in his book, The Knowledge of the Holy, copyright 1961. In the remainder of this treatise, we will examine quotes from Tozer's book and allow him to coach us in our analysis of the church's view of God. Describing the reason for writing his book, Tozer says,
"It,"
meaning his book,
"it is called forth by a condition which has existed in the Church for some years and is steadily growing worse. I refer to the loss of the concept of majesty from the popular religious mind. The Church has surrendered her once lofty concept of God and has substituted for it one so low, so ignoble as to be utterly unworthy of thinking worshipping men. This she,
By she he means the church,
she has done not deliberately, but little by little and without her knowledge, and her very unawareness only makes her situation all the more tragic.
Nothing is more frightening or dangerous than falling into error without knowing it. One cannot arrest a decline if you don't see it happening, or if you see it happening, you determine it is positive progress. The masters of society have so indoctrinated the citizenry with wrong philosophies that we see as normal and right, those things that should be abhorred and eschewed. And so the tumble continues with increasing speed into the valley of despair, with us mistaking the tumble for a joy ride. Tozer's observations describe the cultural tidal wave that is washing away the sense of standing before a God who is more magnificent and splendid than we have words to express. Instead, we are redefining God as an ultra-benevolent, highly lenient deity who bestows love and material blessings without having any expectations of us except that we love him. Love has been detached from obedience, even though the scriptures strongly connect the two. Tozer goes on to say,
The low view of God entertained almost universally among Christians is the cause of 100 lesser evils everywhere among us. A whole new philosophy of the Christian life has resulted from this one basic error in our religious thinking.
It is hard not to despair as one stares up the mountainous slopes of life and sees the avalanche of error gaining speed and volume, rushing down the hills of time, sweeping away churches, crushing families, and suffocating entire societies. The weight and speed of the heavy philosophical powder seems irresistible and inescapable. If Tozer were alive today, he would both see how prophetic his writings were and how much more horrible the situation is than he. Imagine. God is not held high for his majesty, dominion, and power, even if the words are spoken. He is not feared the way he was among his people in the Bible. I believe the way the priests conducted themselves in and around the tabernacle is instructive of what it is like to have a high view of God. It was reflected in everything they did, from the way they spoke about God to the way they dressed to carry out the rituals of worship. Leviticus 16 verses 1 through 4 exemplifies their high view of God.
The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they drew near before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, "Tell Aaron your brother not to come at any time into the holy place inside the veil, before the mercy seat that is on the ark, so that he may not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. But in this way Aaron shall come into the holy place, with a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall put on the holy linen coat, and shall have the linen undergarment on his body, and he shall tie the linen sash around his waist, and wear the linen turban. These are the holy garments."
I am not advocating that we adopt the rituals of ancient Jewish worship, but rather adopt their attitude of reverence toward God for his majesty and wonder. God is holy, which means he is perfect, and that fact alone should inspire awe, make us prostrate our wills before him, and demonstrate behaviors that ascribe to him the majesty he deserves. This last quote from Tozer asserts that the low view of God is the cause of 100 lesser evils. What might some of these 100 lesser evils be? I suggest that one is the loss of the fear of God's anger and dreadful wrath. We try to hide from view the God who struck down Ananias and Sapphira because of their duplicity, drowned an army of Egyptians in collapsing parted waters, showing God's wrath in both the Old and New Testaments. We don't want to think about the God of love raining down vengeance with fiery brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah, or sending worms to consume the evil Herod's flesh. We even wrestle with the image of a humble Jesus, meek and mild, overturning the tables of the money changers in the temple. Tozer expands upon his observation. He writes,
With our loss of the sense of majesty has come the further loss of religious awe and consciousness of the divine presence. We have lost our spirit of worship and our ability to withdraw inwardly to meet God in adoring silence.
This is a sobering observation from Tozer, as he claims that we have lost the spirit of worship. I would expand upon that idea and propose that we have actually replaced the spirit of worship with the spirit of entertainment. Tozer continues,
Modern Christianity is simply not producing the kind of Christian who can appreciate or experience the life in the Spirit. The words, "Be still and know that I am God," mean next to nothing to the self-confident, bustling worshiper in this middle period of the 20th century. This loss of the concept of majesty has come just when the forces of religion are making dramatic gains and the churches are more prosperous than at any other time within the past several hundred years. But the alarming thing is that our gains are mostly external and our losses wholly internal. And since it is the quality of our religion that is affected by internal conditions, it may be that our supposed gains are but losses spread over a wider field.
The alarm has been sounded and crimson flags waved, so that we in the modern church are put on alert to examine our view of God. We must worship the God that is for who he is and not try to make him fit the sensibilities and novel appetites of modern peoples. We must understand that it is through both the Old and New Testaments that we gain an accurate view of who God is, thereby gaining wisdom to become who we need to be. Leaders of the church would do well to consider what actions they need to take based upon this final quote from Tozer.
The only way to recoup our spiritual losses is to go back to the cause, and then make such corrections as the truth warrants. The decline of the knowledge of the holy has brought on our troubles. A rediscovery of the majesty of God will go a long way toward curing them.
We most certainly must rediscover the majesty of God so that our worship and our lives glorify God appropriately. We must remember that Jesus is indeed our friend, but he is also our King. He sends us blessings, but he also sends discipline. That he came to live among us, but he also ascended to a place we can neither go nor imagine. We manufacture products, but he creates worlds. He is long-suffering, but he is also just. He is forgiving, but he holds us accountable to consequence. He needs nothing from us, but we need everything from him. He is other, perfect, beyond comprehension in power and glory. Let creation teach you, and all will displace your ego, pride, and lusts with a high view of God that guides your worship and your life.
Well done, my good and faithful servant.
Rise and follow me. I've come to take you home.
I offer this final word. Many Christians have grown comfortable with the low view of God because it allows them to escape uncomfortable feelings of fear, accountability, and guilt. So, it won't be easy to reverse this trend. However, every good thing from penicillin to the gospel has always been opposed when there is loss associated with positive change. But this is where faith is lived out, resisting the world as it resists us, and bearing the wounds inflicted upon us by fellow believers who live in error. The avalanche seems unstoppable, but upon the high ground of truth there is safety. May you find your true self upon that precipice, where the high view of God prevails,